The morning began with an eerie stillness that didn't belong on a battlefield. The air hung heavy over the Black Sea, a kind of silence that hinted at something vast preparing to move. Before the first sound of jet engines broke the horizon, long shadows crept across the water, twisting like premonitions. And then, as dawn broke over the coastline, a single shape emerged, sleek, low, almost ghost-like. It wasn't the roar that gave it away, but the reflection, a glint of blue-gray steel cutting across the sea's surface. That was the moment Ukraine made its move. Not with a declaration, not with fanfare, but with precision. It was 5:30 a.m. when the Su-27 fighter skimmed the surface at terrifying proximity, barely 60 feet above the waves, streaking toward the Russian-held port of Skadovsk. On radar, it should have been invisible, just another fragment of low-altitude noise. But to the naked eye, to anyone unlucky enough to be awake along the coastline, it was a streak of silver light splitting the dawn. There were no alarms, no locks, no warnings, just two faint trails of smoke rising near the docks, too straight to be artillery, too thin to be flares. The pilot noticed them instantly. Years of instinct told him something wasn't right. And he was right. Those weren't signs of life, they were signs of preparation. The jet banked, smooth but tense, tracing a tight arc over the water. From the pier below, Russian gunners scrambled behind heavy machine guns, their tracers lancing upward in jagged bursts of red. Every round tore through the early light, each flash reflected on the sea like shattered mirrors. What looked like scattered warehouses at the port's edge were, in truth, something far more valuable. An active relay network for unmanned aerial vehicles, a nerve hub that guided dozens of Russian drones across northern Crimea. It wasn't marked on maps. It wasn't supposed to exist. But Ukrainian intelligence had traced the signal traffic weeks ago, and now a single aircraft was here to confirm it, to light the fuse before the real strike began. The first seconds of combat were chaos shaped into rhythm. The Su-27 pitched low, weaving between streams of tracer fire as radar operators on the ground scrambled to triangulate its path. Voices cracked through overlapping frequencies, orders shouted, coordinates misread, panic blooming through the chain of command. "Target extremely low! Unknown vector approaching!" one operator barked. From the rooftops, Russian Strelas and KPVs opened up, filling the air with a storm of tungsten and smoke. The pilot rolled hard left, narrowly slipping between two missile plumes that sliced upward in perfect symmetry. Below, the city seemed to wake all at once. Sirens began to wail, floodlights snapped on across the waterfront. But by then, the jet was already shifting altitude, cutting through layers of air defense like a blade through silk. He saw it now, the relay hub. A cluster of nondescript buildings, corrugated roofs stacked with antennas and signal boosters, all disguised under tarps and false scaffolding. To anyone else, it looked like a half-forgotten port facility. To him, it was the target that could tilt the balance of an entire theater. He wasn't just flying through danger. He was flying into a trap meticulously built to stop him. And yet, every trace of fear was replaced by something colder: focus. This wasn't improvisation, it was a message. By 5:33 a.m., the first missiles had been launched. Streaks of light tore upward from behind a line of storage containers. Strela 3s, cheap, mobile, and deadly at low range. The pilot pulled an 8G turn, muscles locking under the force, every fiber of the aircraft groaning as he twisted away. The missiles missed by inches, detonating in the wake of his exhaust. But the evasion came at a price. He'd flown directly into a corridor thick with radar beams. From the shoreline, a Soviet-era P-19 system pinged him, and almost instantly, an entire sector of Russia's coastal defense grid went active. Dozens of operators locked onto his signature at once. To them, he wasn't a pilot anymore. He was a moving coordinate, and every weapon in range recalibrated toward that single point. What followed was not battle, it was orchestration. Tunguskas, ZSUs, and handheld launchers all lit the air in choreographed bursts. The Su-27 danced between them, an aircraft reduced to motion and willpower. Every evasive maneuver bought seconds. Every second drew him closer to the heart of the relay complex. Smoke trailed behind him. The water below erupted with impact plumes. But then came a gap, a break between radar sweeps, a momentary window where the system faltered. He dove through it, slicing the air at over 500 knots. It wasn't escape, it was positioning. Because what came next wasn't reconnaissance anymore. It was the first step of destruction. He climbed just enough to clear the coastal rise, the cockpit vibrating as the engines strained. From here, he could see the true layout of the port. What looked like random infrastructure now revealed a pattern, a lattice of communications antennas feeding into one central hub. It wasn't just a building, it was the mind of the network. And that's when the realization hit. He wasn't being hunted anymore. He was inside the predator's den. Before we dive deeper into what happened next, take a second to subscribe and tell us where you're watching from. It helps us understand how far these reports are reaching. The next moments would redefine the entire drone war over Crimea, and you'll want to see exactly how it unfolded. Because the strike that followed didn't just destroy a building, it unplugged a whole battlefield. Wait for user comment, give me the next part, to continue with part 2. The moment the Su-27 climbed above the industrial fog, everything changed. The sky itself seemed to react. Alarms rippled across Russian command posts like an awakening beast. Every radar beam, every electronic eye turned toward the lone aircraft clawing through the gray. On the ground, operators inside reinforced bunkers shouted over each other as coordinates flickered on their screens. Target locked! Bearing west-southwest! Low altitude! Climbing! And yet, by the time their systems confirmed the lock, the jet had already shifted again, rolling left, dropping altitude, vanishing from their cones of detection. What they didn't realize was that the pilot wasn't retreating. He was lining up for the strike that would rewrite the balance of the northern front. Through the haze, he saw the coastline unfold like a map of danger. On the right, the cracked outline of Skadovsk's old ship repair yard. On the left, a stretch of warehouses running toward the sea. But in between, he caught the faint glimmer of satellite relays disguised beneath camouflaged netting. He marked it instantly. That was the relay brain, where signals from dozens of drones were routed, amplified, and sent deep into the combat zone over Kherson and Melitopol. That was his objective. Destroying it wouldn't just cripple one outpost, it would blind an entire region. He checked his instruments. The SPO-15, radar warning receiver, blinked with overlapping threats. Monolith B from the east, Garpun B from the port's central mast, and two wideband radars sweeping from the Crimean highlands. Every one of them had painted him, but it didn't matter. The mission was already too far in motion to stop. The bomb slung beneath his wing, a UMPK glide bomb, equipped with a folding wing kit and improvised guidance, was armed and waiting. All he needed was altitude and a clean window to release. The problem was, the Russian Pansier S-2 systems were designed to kill anything that tried. Below him, the port was chaos in motion. Trucks scattered, cranes froze mid-turn, and soldiers sprinted across loading zones, dragging cables and ammunition crates behind them. Somewhere beneath that industrial noise, he knew, the command node pulsed with activity. Dozens of operators trying to re-establish control of their UAV fleets, desperate to keep their reconnaissance eyes alive. But each second they hesitated, the Su-27 drew closer. He leveled out, scanned the horizon, and saw it. Two missile plumes erupting from a hidden Tunguska battery wedged between container stacks. He jerked the stick right, pulling into a brake turn that slammed him against the harness. The first missile streaked past the canopy, its warhead flashing white as it detonated in empty air. The second spiraled wide, confused by the jet's infrared signature, as the pilot dumped a cloud of flares that lit up the dawn like a swarm of fireflies. The Russian gunners adjusted. KPV nests opened up again, their tracers climbing in crimson arcs. ZSU-23 cannons followed, weaving a glowing net across the sky. The pilot threaded through it, the air around him alive with burning streaks of metal. Sparks erupted as stray rounds clipped the fuselage, rattling through the frame. One hit tore a sliver from the wing's leading edge, but the controls held. He could feel every vibration through his gloves, every tremor of the machine fighting to stay alive. And then it happened. The radar warning tone went from scattered chirps to a steady scream, the telltale sign of a lock from a Pansier radar. The most dangerous moment of the mission. Somewhere on the ground, behind a wall of stacked containers, a Pansier S-2 unit powered up, its tracking dish spinning, its launch tubes tilting upward with slow mechanical certainty. In its control cabin, a Russian operator stared at his monitor, watching the single bright return, the Ukrainian jet, cut across his screen. He waited for confirmation, for the clean solution. When it came, he pressed the fire command. At that exact instant, the pilot threw the Su-27 into a steep climb. The engines howled as the aircraft surged upward into the dead zone, that narrow altitude band where the Pansier's radar cone begins to overlap but hasn't yet locked hard. It was a gamble few pilots survived. The altimeter spun, the wings shuddered, the stall warning light flickered. But higher meant a cleaner drop angle, and the mission demanded it. The UMPK's guidance needed height to glide. The pilot ignored every instinct that screamed to level out. He climbed through the fire. Below, the Panzer missiles ignited, 4 of them, each worth close to $90,000, streaking skyward in perfect formation. They rose faster than the eye could follow, leaving white scars across the morning clouds. One passed beneath him, close enough to rattle the canopy glass. Another exploded behind the tail, shaking the entire aircraft with a wave of compressed air. The shock threw him forward, but the systems held. The lights on his display blinked from amber to red and back again. He steadied his hand on the stick and fixed his gaze on the target crosshair hovering over the port's center. The release cue flashed green. He hit the trigger. The glide bomb dropped free, tumbling for an instant before its folding wings snapped open with a faint metallic click. Then it caught the air and began its silent descent. No smoke, no sound. Just a small gray shadow cutting through the dawn toward the relay complex below. The pilot pulled hard right, descending in a corkscrew to escape the blast radius. The Russian radar still tracked him, still painted him, but it no longer mattered. The bomb was already on its path. In the seconds that followed, every camera, every drone feed watching the port captured the same thing. A single object slicing through the fog, vanishing into the roof of a warehouse, followed by a flash so bright it turned night into white. The explosion wasn't enormous in size, but in effect it was devastating. It punched straight through the roof, detonating inside the relay control room where signal amplifiers and power relays were stacked in tight rows. The blast ripped through the entire network like a lightning strike through circuitry. Panels blew out, cables snapped, antennas folded like reeds. And then, as the fire spread, the entire communications lattice of northern Crimea went dark. Every Russian UAV operating in that corridor lost its feed within seconds. Screens froze, control stations went silent. Operators stared at blank monitors as the drones they guided fell from the sky, powerless. What had been a coordinated defense grid was suddenly blind. Ukrainian analysts monitoring from their side of the Dnipro watched as dozens of Russian drone signatures vanished from the map. The strike had worked. The brain of the UAV network was gone. But for the pilot, it wasn't victory yet. It was survival. The detonation had given away his precise location, and every remaining gun on the coast turned its barrels toward the fading roar of his engines. The sky erupted again with tracer fire, a lattice of burning threads chasing him across the water. He dropped altitude sharply, hugging the waves so low that his jet wash churned the sea into white foam. Behind him, missiles launched in desperation, but they couldn't track so close to the surface. One exploded prematurely, another fell harmlessly into the water. The pilot held his line, every muscle locked in concentration, the coastline shrinking behind him as he broke back into open airspace. Smoke columns rose from the port, black against the pale morning light. Even from miles away, he could see the result. A shattered complex, its roof peeled back, the antenna masts collapsed like broken spines. He switched to the encrypted channel. "Target confirmed destroyed. Returning to base." Static answered first, then a calm voice from the operations command. "Copy. All feeds confirm loss of enemy link. You've unplugged them." Back at the port, the aftermath unfolded in slow, chaotic waves. Russian firefighters moved through the smoke, their silhouettes ghost-like against the haze. Water sprayed across twisted metal and burning wires. The air smelled of scorched insulation and salt. Amid the confusion, civilians emerged from nearby housing blocks, staring silently at the wreckage. Ukrainian defense channels lit up with real-time footage from reconnaissance drones hovering at a safe distance. The image was unmistakable. The entire northern relay of Russia's UAV control system had been gutted. The ripple effect was immediate. Across occupied Crimea, dozens of drone sorties scheduled for the morning were aborted. Surveillance missions over Kherson went offline. Operators in Sevastopol reported signal corruption and persistent network failure. Russian logistics channels were flooded with urgent maintenance orders, but the root of the network, the one at Skadovsk, was gone. Ukraine hadn't just struck a military facility. It had paralyzed an entire region's ability to see, to coordinate, to react. For the pilot, the mission would be studied for months. The precision, the timing, the audacity, it all marked a new chapter in the war's invisible front, where the fight wasn't only for land, but for information. His strike didn't just silence a target, it rewrote the battlefield's rhythm. For now, the sea beneath him shimmered with the light of distant fires, and the radio carried only one sound, the quiet relief of voices saying, "It's done." But what happened next would push the conflict into even more uncharted territory. Because the destruction of that relay hub wasn't the end, it was the beginning of a counterstrike no one had anticipated. The Russians would respond, and their retaliation would reshape the electronic and physical landscape of the entire region. In the next part, we'll reveal how that response unfolded, how Ukraine turned a defensive victory into a full-scale digital ambush, and how the Battle of Meticulously would become one of the most complex and technologically advanced engagements of the entire war. Stay tuned, because the story is far from over. That followed the Skadovsk strike wasn't silence, it was shock. Within hours, Russian command nodes from Sevastopol to Rostov scrambled to rebuild the broken communications web. Technicians worked through the smoke, hauling burned relay racks out of the ruins, rerouting power, reconnecting what remained of their signal chain. But the reality was brutal. The northern Crimea UAV network was gone, its circuits melted, its data lines reduced to ash. Moscow's military analysts spent the next 6 hours tracing the blackout and found something worse than destruction, a deliberate precision that suggested deep penetration of their encrypted architecture. Someone, somewhere inside Ukraine's intelligence framework, had understood exactly how to break their invisible backbone. By midday, the retaliation began. From positions near Jankoy and Armyansk, Russian artillery units fired a sequence of high-explosive shells across the Dnipro estuary, targeting suspected Ukrainian launch corridors. Cruise missiles swept across the southern horizon, streaking toward Odessa and Mykolaiv, while in the east, heavy drones lifted from Taganrog airfield to begin reconnaissance sweeps. But the responses were fragmented, confused, overlapping. Coordination that once came through Skadovsk's relay hub was now routed through secondary channels, slower, vulnerable, full of delay. It was as if the entire Southern Command structure had been forced back into the 1980s, operating by voice, by guess, by outdated maps. In Kiev, the Ukrainian General Staff watched the data flow flicker across their screens. "They're blind," one analyst whispered. "They're hitting random coordinates." In a bunker beneath the Ministry of Defense, Officers reviewed fresh satellite imagery showing entire Russian drone squadrons grounded on makeshift airstrips, their operators struggling to reconnect to damaged networks. The opportunity was immediate, but it was also volatile. To exploit the blindness, Ukraine would have to move fast, faster than Russia could restore its eyes. And that's when the order went out. Operation Meticulously. The plan had been dormant for months, filed under contingencies labeled communications suppression. It envisioned a deep strike into Russia's electronic perimeter north of Moscow, where the Meticulously relay complex formed the spinal link between field units and central command. The mission wasn't to conquer or occupy, it was to jam, to sever, to make the entire system deaf. The operation's outline merged traditional combat with cybernetic warfare, blending artillery, drones, electronic jammers, and robotic ground units into a single adaptive web. Now, with Russia's southern grid reeling, the time had come to activate it. At 3:40 local time, a blanket of electromagnetic interference rolled across the western edge of Meticulously. Ukrainian electronic warfare units positioned near the border ignited wideband noise generators that flooded frequencies from 3 to 30 MHz. Civilian radios fell silent across nearby towns. Mobile networks blinked out. Even Russian civilian aircraft reported navigation anomalies. Beneath this electronic fog, the first Ukrainian advance began. Swift, surgical, invisible. From the forest edge near Bryansk, armored convoys of Husky transports emerged, each carrying mounted robotic dogs armed with stabilized 7.62mm machine guns. These weren't prototypes. They were fully integrated units controlled by neural link interfaces tethered to operators miles away. The mechanical pack fanned out through abandoned industrial zones, moving with eerie precision, metal paws clicking on asphalt. Overhead, recon drones, no larger than hawks, painted thermal outlines of enemy positions hidden under camouflage nets. Every sighting transmitted through encrypted data loops to a forward command cell buried under layers of electronic shielding. Within minutes, a full topographic image of Meticulously's defensive ring appeared on Ukrainian displays, accurate down to the nearest antenna. At 4:10 the artillery phase began. BM-27 Uragan launchers hidden in wooded clearings fired staggered salvos, their rockets trailing arcs of smoke that glowed faintly under the rising dawn. Each volley was calculated not for destruction, but for paralysis, targeting fuel depots, logistics nodes, and mobile command trucks. M109 Paladin batteries, operating further west, followed with precision rounds guided by GPS and acoustic triangulation. The strikes landed in measured rhythm, tearing gaps through the defensive perimeter. Within 15 minutes, Meticulously's outer logistics chain was gone. Trucks burned on the highways, warehouses collapsed in on themselves, and power substations along the rail lines crackled in dying blue arcs. Russia's response came heavy and confused. Counter-battery fire erupted from 152mm howitzers positioned beyond the industrial belt, but their targeting data lagged by precious seconds. Ukraine's ECM units had already scrambled their fire control frequencies. Shells landed wide, smashing empty tree lines and already ruined intersections. The electromagnetic storm overhead was so dense that Russian spotter drones fed back false coordinates, chasing phantoms across empty ground. Inside Meticulously's command bunker, officers yelled for updates that never arrived. Their screens showed multiple Ukrainian advances that didn't exist, digital ghosts conjured by Ukraine's adaptive interference systems. By 0500, the second phase commenced. The battlefield blurred into a war of sensors and signals. Ukrainian command teams, riding in armored command vehicles, advanced behind the first line of jammers, flooding every Russian channel with decoy traffic. Messages appeared on enemy radios, mimicking their own command calls, sowing confusion among frontline platoons. Infantry units on both sides began firing at shadows, unable to tell real coordinates from false. For the first time, a frontline battle was unfolding as much inside the electromagnetic spectrum as in the mud and smoke. Amid this chaos, a special operations detachment advanced from the western tree line under cover of the static. Their mission was surgical. Cut Matiski's last intact fiber trunk, connecting it to Moscow. Guided by live drone feed, they infiltrated the industrial district through drainage culverts, emerging behind storage silos where the communication cables ran underground. Within minutes, thermite charges were set, timed to burn through the conduits at precisely the moment the next artillery wave struck. When the charges went off, the effect was invisible but absolute. In the command bunker, every screen froze. The officers still saw data, still heard the hum of their own generators, but their voices went nowhere. The network had become an echo chamber. With communications severed, Matiski's defense grid fractured. Units began operating independently, some retreating, others advancing blindly toward phantom coordinates. Ukrainian forward drones circled above, marking targets with infrared tags that blinked unseen by human eyes. Artillery spotters translated those tags into live coordinates, feeding them to the guns still firing from the tree line. Precision shells landed with metronomic timing. Entire intersections disappeared in controlled bursts. By 6:20, the third phase ignited. Ukrainian assault squads on combat motorcycles surged from the south, weaving through rubble-strewn streets at over 70 miles per hour. Behind them followed small tracked robots, nicknamed Panthers, equipped with dual machine guns. The machines advanced like a living wave, their optics scanning every shadow for muzzle flashes. Russian infantry tried to regroup behind fortified checkpoints, but their coordination had collapsed. BMP-3 vehicles fired blindly into the smoke, their autocannons punching holes through empty buildings. Ukrainian squads countered with portable 84 and NLO launchers, each shot measured, deliberate. Flames rolled through the industrial sprawl, turning the once orderly rail junctions into fields of burning steel. Overhead, Ukrainian Mi-35 gunships appeared through the haze, flying dangerously low, their rotor wash steering the smoke into spiraling columns. They fired 9M-120 Ataka missiles into Russian armor columns moving along the northern approach. Explosions rippled through the convoy, one tank after another turning into molten wreckage. The rhythm of the battle shifted again. For a brief window, Matiski belonged to no one. Every unit fought in isolation, every frequency screamed with overlapping noise. Then came Russia's counterstrike. From the western arc, the ground began to tremble under the approach of T-80 tanks advancing in staggered formation, supported by BMP-3s and mobile Panzer systems. Above them, two Su-3040 fullback bombers roared in from Pushkino Air Base, their afterburners leaving streaks of fire across the clouds. Their targeting systems struggled through the jamming but managed to lock onto two Ukrainian artillery batteries near the tree line. The bombs fell in synchronized pairs, slamming into the earth with thunderous force. The forest erupted into fireballs. Yet even as smoke billowed, new Ukrainian batteries rotated into position, firing counter-barrages before the Su-34s could circle back. By 700, the entire battle zone was engulfed in chaos. A contest not of soldiers alone, but of machines, algorithms, and frequencies. Command posts on both sides fought to control an invisible tide of information. Ukrainian technicians worked inside mobile command trucks, rerouting data streams through portable satellites to maintain the tempo. Russian electronic warfare units, desperate to regain advantage, activated high-power jammers that blanketed even civilian frequencies across hundreds of kilometers. Radio networks across Moscow's outskirts went silent for several minutes, a blackout that didn't go unnoticed by the world's intelligence agencies. In those final hours, the battlefield no longer resembled conventional war. It was an experiment unfolding in real time, a contest between two nations redefining how conflict is fought and won. Matiski burned, not as a captured city, but as a symbol of how the digital realm had fused with the physical one. When the smoke finally began to clear, Ukrainian units withdrew, leaving behind a maze of disabled vehicles, collapsed comm towers, and empty silence. Russia's communication trunk had been gutted, its sensors blinded, its relay frequencies reduced to noise. In Kiev, analysts watched as the last signals from Meticulously flickered out. The operation's success was undeniable. In less than 90 minutes, Ukraine had severed one of Russia's main northern communication arteries without deploying a single division across the border. It was the most advanced demonstration of hybrid warfare since the conflict began, a perfect fusion of drone intelligence, electronic deception, and precision artillery. But beyond the tactical triumph, a quieter understanding spread through the corridors of power. Moscow's defenses around the capital were no longer impenetrable. The first layer had been pierced. The question now wasn't whether Ukraine could strike again, but how soon and how deep. As the sun rose over the shattered outskirts of Meticulously, smoke drifted across the fields, carrying the scent of burned circuitry and fuel. Civilians peered from shattered windows, their faces pale with disbelief. Somewhere in the distance, the last echo of artillery faded into the morning air. What began as a single jet racing over Skadovsk had become a chain reaction stretching hundreds of miles, a war fought not just with steel and fire, but with information itself. This was the new face of modern warfare, not lines on a map, but networks, not territories conquered, but systems dismantled. The question left hanging over both capitals was no longer who had more weapons, but who could think faster, adapt quicker, and control the silence between the signals. Because in that silence, the silence that followed every strike, every blackout, every vanishing drone, lay the real power shaping tomorrow's battlefield. And as the dust settled over Meticulously, both sides knew this was only the beginning.